Okay, hi everyone. Today I'm going to tie the polar fibre minnow. I've had a few requests now to show people how to do these ones. These are good, flies that are medium size that imitate a number of bait fish, and you can vary the colours of the polar fibre and all those sorts of things. So let me quickly run through the materials, and I'm going to have to probably stop and start the video for this one because we've got to do mixing epoxy and all sorts of stuff for this. But the materials I'm going to use today are Gamakatsu SL12S hooks. The size on that fly there and the size that I'll be using is a 1/0. I'll be using mono thread. I will be using flash, a couple of different sorts. I've got here angel hair in silver and pearl. Angel hair, as you can see there, is a very, very fine sort of flash, and the reason I like it is you can comb it through the polar fibre. Okay, so you can vary these flies quite a bit in terms of colours, and some people also like to put a little red throat on it. So that's one I've just finished, ready to do the epoxy stage. I've just got to stick some eyes on it and comb it through, but you'll see there I've put a little bit of red flash under the hook there. That's a variation that some people put in it. Personally, I don't usually like it. I just did that one that way just to show people that you can tie in a little bit of red flash, and that would be the first step in tying that fly. Okay, so obviously the main ingredient for this is the polar fibre. And whatever colours you want to do, I mean, it's up to you. The ones I usually tie are white underbody, then lighter colour, and then a darker colour over the top, with the flash sort of in between a couple of those stages. The colours I find effective are white with a bit of chartreuse and then olive, or white, this shrimp colour, or sort of a tan colour, and a little bit of grey polar fibre. Okay, so I think that's it. Obviously you're going to need head cement. Before you comb it through, I suggest that you head cement the thread, and then just your epoxy. So you could either use the 5-minute epoxy like that, or if you've got the tough fly, the tough fly core. This one I've got in here was done with the tough fly. Okay, so the tough fly that's cured by that UV light. Other than that, 3D eyes, I would recommend using 3D eyes and not the 2D eyes. They just give the fly a little bit more of a profile. If I turn that around, you can see the profile of the fly there. The 3D eyes you can see from the front, from the sides, from underneath, and from the top. So you get a much better profile in terms of a more natural looking bait fish, and you get that wider head profile, which I think is also important with these ones. Okay, let me stop there and put a new hook in, and we'll start the tying process. Okay, so we're ready to go with this fly. So start the thread at the eye and just wind back, so you've got a little bit of a base of the thread, but wind back to just about halfway down the shank of the hook. That's where you're going to tie in the first clump of polar fibre. Okay, so as with the polar fibre, when we did the all clear eyes fly, make sure when you cut it off the patch that you pull out the little short pieces, because we don't want those in the fly. Okay, so the first step is just to tie in the first piece of polar fibre. Now you see, polar fibre, the good thing about it is it's got that natural fishy sort of taper. You don't have to do anything to it, you just cut it straight off the patch and tie it onto the hook. And you've got to make sure that you tie it on top of the hook. Now watch that you don't tie too much of it in. You really only want to sort of grab it and hold it in place and just get that tip. If you tie too far back down the polar fibre, what you find happening is you've got these little flat spots which then lead to gaps in the tail of the fly. So one piece, then the next piece you want is just in front of that. Again, just tie in the very tip of it as much as you can, and you'll see already that that's starting to take shape. Don't worry about the little gaps you get between the tufts. when we've finished tying, we'll comb it and we'll smooth all that out, okay? So just keep doing that until you get towards the eye of the hook. I find usually on a 1/0 hook, 3 pieces of white, and then we can start tying in the colour that we want. Okay, so there's the 3 pieces of white. So you've got a reasonable sort of underbelly there. Okay, so the next step that I do then, after I've done the 3 pieces of white, is to put the flash in. So a little bit of this pearl flash, sort of forms a lateral line and gives it a little bit of a flash through the fly. So the same as you would normally do, just turn that over and you can see the flash in there now. Okay, then we move on to, in this case I'm going to use shrimp or tan or whatever you want to call it. On the packet it says shrimp, so we'll call it shrimp. Same deal, just catch the end and tie in the tip. Okay, and make sure as you're going that it's all sitting on top of the hook. That's what you want it to sit up on top of the hook like that. Okay, and then lastly for this one, just a little bit of a darker colour just to give it a sort of a back, as a bait fish would have, a slightly darker colour, and we tie that off to as close to the eye of the hook as we can get it. Okay, so that's the grey. And then it is just a matter of giving it a little bit of a build up of thread. Don't get too worked up about the front of it. You got to remember you're going to epoxy over it, so you know, just a quick whip finish. I wouldn't go overboard with that either. And that's pretty much the base of the fly done. You can see that bait fish profile already, and if I turn it around, you'll see it's also got that bit of a profile at the front already. So so that's pretty much the tying steps done. As I said, I go under and do put some head cement on all of the thread underneath, and the reason for that is I'm going to comb it and also mark it with some permanent marker before I do the epoxy and stick the eyes on. So it's important to do all that stuff before you do the final set of epoxy, because once the epoxy's on, of course, you can't do it. And if you've got the hair not blended properly, and the only way you're going to blend it is to comb it, it's going to be very difficult once the epoxy goes on. Okay, so I'll stop the video there and I'll do that step and then come back and we'll put the eyes and the epoxy on. Okay, now as I said, I usually colour these flies with permanent marker. So let me just quickly do that. It's pretty straightforward. So I'll just do this one. And what I usually do is do some lines down to the colour, just onto the white. So hold the hook down and just get your permanent marker and just use little dots. Don't try and draw a line on the material, but if you use little dots, you'll see you'll get lines through the material like that. And don't get too precious about it. You know, the more random the better, probably, from a fishing perspective. And then I just go through and, you know, just put a few dots in between, and you can see that it's starting to look a bit more bait fishy. All right, and just do the same on the other side. And once you've done that, you just stick the eyes on. Now, stick the eyes on like on that one. You know, just back from the hook eye, as close to the hook eye as you can get, but make sure you get it on all the material. That's the only thing with sticking the eyes on, and I do glue them on. And the reason I glue them on is you don't want them coming loose when you do the epoxy. Okay, so we'll do that next. Okay, the final step, and probably the one that people have the most trouble with, is doing the epoxy on the head. So as you can see, this fly's got the eyes on it. It's been blended through, marked up with the pen, and is ready to be epoxied. So I've mixed up some 5-minute epoxy, and I'm just going to use a toothpick to apply the epoxy. Now I usually start at the front and smear it on over the eye and make sure you get a reasonable coat. Then I do the same on the other side, start at the front, smear it on over the eye, make sure you get a reasonable coat. Now the most important thing with this, of course, is to make sure you do get it across the eye, and a reasonable coat under the hook shank there, like so, just so you know, when you're fishing, you're not you know, gonna lose your fly or the materials off your fly because the threads come undone. So you also don't want to lose the eye. So same deal, always work as much as you can from the hook eye back. If you tend to work the other way, what you find is the material starts to move forward on the fly, and it becomes very difficult to work with. Now what you want to try and do is just go a little bit behind the eye on each side with the epoxy. Make sure you get some, as I said, underneath, and don't overdo the epoxy. You don't need a hell of a lot of epoxy on it, and I think that's the mistake a lot of people make, is they end up putting way too much epoxy on, and of course it starts to, you know, drop as it sets, and you end up with this huge underbelly under the fly, and it just doesn't look like it should. So I'm just about done. As you can see, I've just sort of built up a little bit of a head with the epoxy, and the most important thing, as I said, was to make sure that the eyes are completely covered with the epoxy, and it sort of covers the material at the head and the thread so that it doesn't come undone when you're using the fly. Now let me talk a little bit about using this fly in a fishing situation. You know, this is a very effective fly for dead drifting. The thing with the polar fibre is it just ripples in the water, so it's very effective for, you know, just sort of throwing out into a school of fish, for example, and not stripping it, or stripping it very slowly. It will you know, have its own movement just through the tail in the water, so very effective from that perspective. Okay, so now you can see roughly what I've done there. If I look at it from underneath, you can see that it's covered completely the eyes, it's down over the hook of the eye. You're starting to get that little belly there, which means you just need to turn the fly over a little bit, and you might just need to keep rotating it now until the epoxy is set. So you know, that's going to take 3 to 5 minutes depending on how long it takes you to put the epoxy on. But you can see I've created you know, quite a decent head on the fly with the epoxy there, and on the other side you can see that there. So that's all there is to it, and as I said, now it's just a matter of waiting for the epoxy to dry and you're done. So fairly straightforward. You can see there it's covered the eye, you can see on that angle you covered the eye, but you can see the eyes, and this is what I was saying before about using 3D eyes. You can see the eyes, doesn't matter what angle you look at that fly. Anyway, that's it. If you've got any feedback, comments, questions, whatever, let me know. But that's basically the Polar Fibre Minnow. Good luck, guys.